Hi everyone, welcome to the New Work by Design podcast, where we discuss how to create fulfilling workplaces. I'm Manuel, and my guest today is Lisa Gill. My conversation with Lisa centers around adult-to-adult relationships, in particular, but not limited to in the workplace. I've known Lisa since we first met at Meaning Conf in Brighton in 2019. I had listened to many episodes on her podcast, Leadermorphosis, before. So when I spotted her during a break at the conference, I walked up to her and expressed my appreciation for spreading the word about new work or self-organization in that area. She's kept doing so consistently since, with her podcast, with blog posts, with conference talks, and with a book that she co-authored. She's considered one of the most influential voices in the new ways of working community, and rightfully so. I appreciate Lisa for being a bit of a nerd around the topic of self-organization. She has a wealth of knowledge, and at the same time, she's very humble about it. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with her, and I think you will too. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with Lisa. Lisa, thanks for joining me for this conversation. Our mission today is, or at least my mission, I hope you join me, is to define or at least get closer to what does it mean to have adult-to-adult relationships or interactions at work. I know you use the term, I would say a lot, or at least frequently in your writing. So and that's why I invited you to this, because I'm pondering that question as well. What does it really come down to? And I guess it is a very complex topic. And so there might not be a very simple, straightforward definition without losing a lot of context, but I hope we get closer to something like that today. So that is the introductory question. So what are adult-to-adult relationships at work? And then we dive deeper.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for this question. It's really fun to explore it with you. I was actually talking with a colleague earlier today, and we were reflecting on adult to adult and what it means in our kind of context of supporting teams and organizations and people to sort of shift their cultures towards being more adult to adult, right? And we were talking about that so much of it seems to be about growing up. Like we were talking about how she and I, for example, we were reflecting on our relationship, our kind of collaboration as colleagues, co-workers over the last few years. And I shared with her that a key turning point, I think, in our relationship, in our collaboration, was when I let her down. I said yes to collaborating on a client project with her, and then I changed my mind. And I was a bit sloppy in how I did that, how I informed her about it and cleaned it up and so on. And so she asked me if we could have a relationship conversation because it had kind of ruptured our relationship. And so we had this Zoom call. This was a couple of years ago now. And she was really honest and shared with me what she was feeling about it. Like, I feel really shocked because you said yes and you seemed really enthusiastic. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I've taken on too many things and now I can't do it. And now I feel hurt and I feel, so she was sharing very openly about how she felt without kind of blaming or judging me. And then she also shared, it starts to affect our relationship a bit because now I'm wondering, can I trust your yeses in the future? Or do I have to check every time I ask you to do something and you say yes? Do I have to check? Is it a genuine yes, or are you going to change your mind? So this was like a very adult conversation, I think. And I was really grateful for her being so generous and brave and honest. And it marked a turning point in our relationship because I listened to her. I tried not to be defensive or argue or, but that wasn't my intention. And, I just listened. Wow, okay, I'm really sorry. And yeah, sounds like it was really unsettling for you and blah, blah. And like, what do you need from me to trust me again? Like, I care about our relationship and I don't want you to be wondering every time you invite me to something. So anyway, we had this beautiful conversation. We call them in Tough, we call them pebbles conversations, where you bring up a pebble that you have with someone in your relationship. And I think a lot of times in work culture, we think about conflicts as something bad that should be avoided. If conflicts are happening, we did something wrong. But for me, that example is very like special to me. It's very precious. Like I think fondly about that conversation because it didn't just like repair our relationship, it actually upgraded it. And now we can talk much more openly to each other. And so that is just a story that came to mind for me that kind of is present in terms of like, what does adult to adult mean? To me, it means talking about the things that are the most difficult to talk about is one way you could define it, I guess.
So the example you gave is conflict. Is there other examples of things to talk about that are important that would match that criteria for you?
Yeah, I guess like if I zoom out from that example is about relationships, you could say. So you could say that to be more adult to adult is to be much more responsible for the quality of your relationships and to be responsible for your part in things working or not working. So in that context, in normal kind of work, like in the sort of old paradigm of organizations, if you had a tension with someone, either you wouldn't say anything about it, or maybe you would gossip about that person to someone else, or maybe you would try to talk about it, but in a kind of work only context, like let's not go into the feeling stuff or the personal stuff, that's not work. Or maybe you'd escalate it to your manager or to HR or something like that. Whereas for me, adult to adult is like to see myself as responsible for that. I don't have to solve things by myself, but it's to see that as like, okay, if that relationship's not working, it's my responsibility to do something about that. And part of like creating a culture of like trust is through openness. So if I can share much more openly about what's going on with me and what I'm thinking and what questions I'm having, what concerns I'm having, without projecting blame onto anyone or outsourcing the solutions to anyone, it's more like bringing it up, like putting it on the table and then working through it with someone. So that's one aspect of it, I think. But in general, adult to adult is like the opposite of adult to adult would be parent child. So either and it's usually if I'm like a manager or if I'm someone with experience or expertise, or I've been in the organization a long time, so I'm in a position of power or authority, then me being parental would be me taking care of people, or like sort of being in a bit of a rescuer dynamic, maybe like I need to solve this, I need to get them to do this. Like I'm sort of driven by trying to change things, change people, usually with good intentions, and usually I'm not consciously doing it that way. But my mindset and my way of being makes me become kind of parental. And then what happens? Everyone around me becomes kind of like a child, right? Where they become a bit passive, a bit dependent on me for solutions and answers. And I get frustrated. Why can't they solve it themselves? But I'm feeding that dynamic by giving solutions and advice and so on, because it feels nice. And so, or, if the other way up, child parent, it might be what I was talking about before, that before, if I had a conflict or a tension with someone, be like, that's a difficult conversation. I don't want to deal with that. You solve that. You deal with that. I complain to someone else, if I exaggerate a bit. So I think sometimes the adult to adult way of working is sort of a blessing and a curse, because, you have a lot more autonomy, I think, and a lot more freedom, and yeah, I think you are treated with more respect and you treat others with more respect. But there's a price for that, and that price is responsibility. You have to then accept the consequences of your choices. If you work in like a self-managing organization and you don't have a boss and you don't like the way things are, then it's on you to at least initiate the process of doing something about that. So there's a kind of comfort in being in a parent-child world. So that's why, yeah, to go back full circle, like adult is sort of growing up, and it's sometimes I feel my experience of it is sort of like, oh damn, yeah, I need to talk to that person. Oh, but I don't wanna. It's gonna be awkward. It's gonna be uncomfortable. But I know it's like, it's like eating my broccoli. I know it's good for me and us, and I know I should do it, but it takes courage and it's not comfortable.
I guess instance of being in the child mode is taking on the victim role. And that is very comfortable in the sense of I don't have to do anything. I'm just here to say this sucks and I need help. Whereas if you're stepping more in the creator role, it's like, okay, it sucks. Now what am I doing about it?
Yeah.
And you might not be able to resolve the situation, but there's always something you can do, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so it's easier to stay in the child, in the victim position. Yeah. Or
Yeah.
other way around, expecting adult interactions from yourself and others is challenging. It's a lot of effort, takes a lot of energy.
Yeah. It's like, to give another example, a colleague and I were talking yesterday. We have these like buddies where you have a life talk with them every 6 months or so. And I was sort of complaining that I'm really busy at the moment and it feels like I never really have space or time to do the things that I want to do. And I was saying, but it's me that's saying yes to these things. I have no one to blame but myself. I don't have a boss who's like piling things on my desk. And she was really kind of lovingly challenging me to see that I was stuck in this victim mode. That so long as I was like, yeah, but I just don't have time for that. And like, I'm just so busy. I don't have time to even think about what I would want to do. And she was helping me to see how that was a kind of an escape for me of being truly responsible, because I was sort of seeing myself as powerless. I can't do anything about this. And so long as I did that, it kept me kind of safe in a way. That I don't have to risk making a choice, making a difficult decision. So I like the idea sometimes that like leadership is confronting people with choice. And so she was confronting me with choice. She even provocatively asked me, like, after I was squirming around of like, what can I do about this? Oh, but I can't do this. And after a while she said, well, so maybe you just continue like this then forever. And I was like, no, I don't want that. She's like, okay, so what are you going to do? I was like, damn.
That's pretty good. I think in that situation, in her shoes, my fixer would come on very loudly. I need to have the solution for Lisa, so she's not struggling like
Yes,
this. And
exactly.
staying in there is like, I'm here to support you, but I
Yes,
don't have the answer either. I'm just trying to help you find it yourself.
exactly. And she's also more senior than me, you could say, in the organization. So could also have been easy for her to be like, what can tough do for you? Maybe we can change your role or like try and solve it for me. But that's sort of robbing me of the opportunity to develop and to find my own way forward.
Yeah. Okay. So circling back to adult relationships more specifically, do you think there are specifics about the workplace that are different than in other relationships, say with a partner or a friend? What's specific in the workplace that is interesting about adult relationships, or not necessarily interesting, but specific that is worthwhile to keep in mind?
Yeah, interesting question. What do I think about that? I think in a way one thing that comes to mind is that whenever I'm coaching two people, two co-workers that have a conflict, for example, when they're really clashing and really struggling to find a way to work together, like they're just really different and they're never going to see eye to eye, when I might ask them, well, is it possible for you to not work together? Could you be on different teams or something? And very often it's like, no, we have to find a way to work together. Whereas I guess in our personal life, if you don't get along with someone, in many cases, you can just break up with them, or maybe you don't hang out with them so much anymore in a friendship group, or with your family. I guess it's a bit more difficult, but family situations, I think you can get by on very surface level interactions, right? Whereas I think in a work context, especially nowadays where work is so complex and interdependent and like fast and uncertain and all of that stuff, it requires like a pretty high level of quality of relationships. So I think in a way, the expectation is higher on us to attend to our relationships in work more than it is in our personal life. I think we could also be much better at it in our personal life. I mean, I see that there's also a shift in parenting, for example, people parenting in a much more adult way, you could say. Same in schools, very slowly. I think that's starting to shift. And like in my personal relationship, my partner and I, we were inspired by Alana Irving's blog about running agile retrospectives on your relationship. So we have a relationship retrospective. My boyfriend and I, we try and have them every month. So we're a bit nerdy like that. Because we find that it helps us to have like a specific container where we give each other feedback or appreciate each other or share things we're struggling with. So I think there's more of an onus on us to be better at relationships in work, maybe. I don't know. What do you think?
I think the payoff is probably even higher in partnerships and friendships. But I think you're right in the sense of, well, if it doesn't work out with a friendship or even a partnership, like the relationship will fizzle out. Whereas at work, it just means, well, then I have to leave the company, and I might not necessarily want to do that just because I don't get along with this one person, because otherwise it might be great. I guess we don't have as high of an autonomy to choose who we spend time with, because it's more about what do we need to get the job done. And okay, if you're the expert in this and I'm the expert in this, we just need to figure it out together. So I think there's something to it. I think there's also something about like the work we both do, a shift in, whereas in the past it might have been easy to get away with, well, we're just professional with each other. Like we send each other documents, we don't even have to talk with each other. But I think that has changed to, well, we're now expecting more collaboration between people, not just collaboration, but shared decision making. And for that, you just need better relationships.
Yes.
Do you know, and do you want to share an example of a workplace that does this really well? Like having created an environment where adult to adult happens most of the time, if not all the time.
I mean, I'm biased because my organization is the best example of that, and that's why I'm there. It's why I stay.
It's all right. You can toot your own horn.
Yeah, and I don't mean it to say that to sort of brag, because it's something that we has been hard won. It's taken us. I mean, the company's been around 21 years. I've been in the company 8 years, and we're about 25 people now. But it takes a lot of commitment. But I notice the difference when I talk to friends of mine and colleagues of mine in other organizations, that I remember, oh yeah, that's what it was like in other companies, where if I had a irritation with someone else, or if we had, let's say we were working on a project together and there was like a dynamic going on in the team between two people, and like they would just not sort it out, and we would all be like having these back channel conversations in between meetings, like, oh, it's so painful, like why wouldn't they just sort it out, or things just feel so tense or weird, or it feels hard to, like, I feel like we could be so much more efficient, so much energy was going into all of these things. Whereas now in Tough, I know that if someone has a pebble, as I said before, with me, they will tell me. And I know that
Can you
if
just
I,
say, for people who don't know, pebble, is that like you bring up a small problem before it becomes a big one?
yes, yeah. So it's like having a pebble in my shoe.
Mm-hmm.
And if in the beginning it's small and it doesn't hurt that much, but if I continue to walk, the longer it goes, the more painful it becomes and the more energy it takes to do something about it. So bringing up a pebble with a colleague is like, I have a small thing that's bothering me. I feel like on Slack you've been a bit short with me, and I don't think it's your intention, but it started to affect me now, and I feel like maybe there's something going on, and I just want to talk about it because I want us to work well together. That kind of thing.
Mm.
And I know that people will bring them up with me, and it's not fun or easy necessarily when people do that, but it means that sometimes we talk about it like it's like cleaning the channel between us. So it means that it feels clean most of the time. There's frictionless, more or less. Or if there's friction, it's like we can just jump on it in the moment and talk about it. And I have this moose head behind me, and that's another term we use, moose head being like an elephant in the room. Like, so we start our meetings with like, any moose heads today? And people can really feel free, like in a whole company meeting, all 25 of us, to say, yeah, I have a moose head about this decision we made as a company. I don't like how we did that, or whatever. So I think that helps. And we all give each other feedback a lot. So we're big on development. So that for me is another part of the adult to adult world, is like being committed to developing, learning, growing, and supporting each other in doing that. So yeah, I think we're pretty good at that. But it's, as I said, it takes time, and sometimes, like we said, it's easier, more comfortable to be in the child position, like to abdicate, like, oh, I don't want to deal with that. I'd much rather just gossip about them to someone. But we also encourage each other. If I were to do that, someone would say, well, have you had a conversation with them, Lisa? No, I know I should though. Oh, okay, I'm going to. Yeah. So I'm trying to think if I can think of other companies that I've come across recently. I know that I've heard that other companies have their equivalent of the moose head thing, like stinky fish.
Mm-hmm.
And like other metaphors. I find it helps to have these metaphors of these code words to make it a bit less scary.
Yeah, I think it makes it a bit playful and easier to
Yeah.
put on the table. Yeah.
Mm.
It makes a lot of sense that a small consultancy would be an example for where it's done really well. I think they have an unfair advantage of most people in it are very similar in the sense of their expertise, what they're doing, or also mindset. And they're usually rather small, like you said, 25, right? And size plays a big role in the depth of the relationships. It makes me wonder if it's unfair or maybe less judgmental, unrealistic to expect a similar level of relationships for maybe in a product company where it's very different people. You might have salespeople and marketing and designers and programmers, and they might all be very different in terms of their characteristics, in terms of them as a person. And secondly, that's not their core business. Whereas as you, as a consultant working with companies like this, you would have done extensive research and thinking around these topics, whereas they might not have. So I guess my question here is, when we work with other companies that are not like our consultancy, how should we approach this? What's a realistic goal we should go for?
Yeah. I'm thinking about, I spend most of my time doing like leading courses with people from all kinds of organizations on how to be more adult to adult. And I'm thinking about a course I was leading recently in Amsterdam with a bunch of software engineers from a company with like 400 people or so. And it's a big stretch for them, to talk about feelings, or, I don't have time to coach someone. Instead of, it's quicker for me to just give them advice, So there are a lot of challenges and a lot of, I think it is quite a shift to embrace like more adult to adult dynamics, because we've all been conditioned and promoted for more parent-child dynamics, being good at giving advice, being good at solving things, being fast, being analytical. And those things are valuable, but to be adult to adult requires something else as well. But I kind of look at it, I guess, as like a scale or a continuum. And there are people like me and you and my colleagues who are, development junkies, maybe. We like this stuff, and we'll push ourselves and commit, and we have time and energy for that, and that's great. And then I try and think about people at the other end of the continuum, like you said, who are sort of, more like, this is just like a small feature of their work life, and they are mainly concerned with, how can I be more effective, or how can I have a more pain-free work life? How can I make things a bit more, have less friction or whatever? And then I think there are some principles. I'd like to think there are some small things you can do that would make a difference. Like, I mean, one of them being like changing things at like a habit level, by using things like liberating structures in your meetings or in your discussions, that just changes the way that participation happens. Or embracing some principles of more adult to adult relationships, like choice. Like that for me is a key principle of adult to adult, which means I don't just give you feedback because I'm your manager. I ask you first, is it okay if I give you some feedback? Would it be interesting to hear it? And then I don't give my feedback and then tell you what you should do about it. I give you a choice. Like, what do you want to do with that feedback? Is it interesting to develop? Do you want some coaching? Or choosing to be in a conversation or not, or choosing the purpose of a conversation or a meeting, or choosing, just choosing much more, which means slowing down a little bit, not being on autopilot. And then, I think getting just slightly better at certain abilities, like listening, like asking coaching questions, like feedback, can make a big difference on that sliding scale, even if you're only moving a couple of inches.
Yeah, it reminds me of like Shuha Ri was like, if you have people who are not that much into it, just giving them a recipe can be the right thing and helps a lot already. And they don't need to understand parts work and triggers and boundaries and emotions. And it's just like, use this recipe and you'll have better relationships.
Yeah, and if they see a self-interest in it too. Because if I talk to a bunch of software engineers and say, so we're going to explore adult to adult relationships, they'd be like, why? What's in it for me? So it's much more, I think it's much more valuable if they can see that, how they operate automatically, that there's a potential for another way that would be beneficial for them. That if they can start to see that always like jumping in and solving things and giving advice is kind of keeping my whole team dependent on me and eating up all my time, and when I'm complaining that no one's taking initiative or responsibility, maybe I'm playing a part in that. So if I could shift that, then it would make my life a lot better, because they would be more self-sufficient and I would have more time, and for them to start to find their self-interest in that beyond some kind of psychology concept.
Yeah. I was just thinking when you said that, like selling it as adult to adult is probably not speaking the client's language. So we're like, what? They're all above drinking age here. What are you talking about?
Yeah,
Of course, we're all
exactly.
adults.
We don't treat people like babies. What are you talking about?
Yeah. I'd like to shift a bit more into the emotional part of it. What do you think are the emotions that get in the way most often of having adult to adult interactions? Like, what are the emotions that are triggered and that shift us into parent or child ego states?
Mm, good question. I mean, the one that comes to mind first is fear. My colleague Carl Eric likes to say that there are two types of people: people who are scared and people who don't know they're scared. So I think many times what stops me from having an adult to adult conversation is I'm scared that it will go badly, that I'll damage the relationship, that I won't be able to control what happens next, and so on. And people share that with me too, like when I'm coaching them, like, oh, I want to give this person feedback, but like in the past it hasn't gone well and I'm worried about how they'll react. So maybe it's better just to wait. Maybe it's just me, maybe, to kind of come up with reasons to postpone it or avoid it. Which makes sense, right? Because our brains are wired to avoid pain and protect us. What other emotions stop us? I suppose it threatens all the kind of core things that humans need, like belonging. I worry that that person might not like me or might kick me out, or my sense of security, or yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I think fear is one big one, and it can have, I think, two sides. And I think you mentioned both. One being I'm afraid of damaging the relationship, and the other one is more about maybe being afraid of your anger and what you'll do with that and the harm that it could cause me.
Mm.
I think the other second one that's maybe just as big is shame.
Mm.
Like if I made a mistake and I'm ashamed, so I won't speak up or won't actively address it and say, here's how something went wrong.
Yes.
How can we fix it? And you rather keep it under the carpet.
Yes.
I think that's, or even if then someone else, or if someone else addresses something with me, my self-talk might be, I'm not good enough.
Mm.
I'm a failure. I'm flawed.
Yes.
I think that is a second big one. So I think it's fear and shame, and then
Mm.
I think anger can be laid on top of both of these.
Mm. Yeah, I definitely resonate with shame because I think a lot of us want to believe that we can be professional, and to be professional is like I don't take things personally, and I can collaborate with anyone. And there's maybe a shame in admitting, like, I felt hurt when you didn't include me in that meeting or something. It's like, do I dare say that? Is that silly? Is that me just being childish? There's a shame in daring to share something like that, like that I should be professional, but it's not reality. Like, we are emotional creatures.
Yeah, that sounds even almost like meta shame. Like, right, I'm ashamed to address it that I was affected.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess also why I see one of the key lessons to learn before you can have adult to adult interactions in stressful situations. Like when it's all running smoothly, it's easy, but in stressful situations or when something went wrong, is to acknowledge that emotions are human, and to ignore them is, well, silly, really. If you're after the best outcome, ignoring the emotions doesn't make any sense. If it's like, protecting yourself, then yes, ignoring your
Yes.
emotions might be useful.
Yeah. Or also, I think a thing that prevents people from having adult to adult conversations is a fear of other people's emotions, that I won't know what to do with it. It'd be like this big fire, and I won't know how to contain it. That for me is where kind of mastering the ability to really listen to people so they feel heard is like such a magic tool. Because whenever, like, I was coaching someone just earlier today who was needing to have a difficult conversation with their team and like give them some bad news, and they were really worrying about, how can I prepare this conversation? How can I say it in a way that they're not going to react badly? And we were reflecting on like, well, they're going to react. There's nothing you can do that's going to guarantee them being like, okay, great, understood. No. So in a way, it's like pointless to worry and think about, if I try and craft the perfect message. It's like, there's a great quote in a book. I think it's in the book Difficult Conversations. I think it's about feedback. The feedback is like a hand grenade. Thrown hard or soft, it's going to hurt. So it's like, just to say it and then listen to whatever comes up, and know that you don't need to do anything with that or fix it or solve it or change it. It's just then to just be with another human being.
I was just smiling because the metaphor of feedback being a hand grenade is quite different to the popular metaphor of feedback is a gift.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that one was for difficult feedback, tough feedback, you could say, or developmental feedback.
All metaphors are wrong. Some
Yes.
very useful to understand certain aspects, so it's all good.
Yeah.
I was also wondering, so the fear of the emotional reaction of the person I might be addressing something with. There's probably several reasons, but my assumption is a very big one is projection. Like I haven't learned to handle these emotions myself really well. And so I'm afraid that someone else can't either. And we both lack the relational skills to then hold that space without it becoming ugly. Does that make sense? And do you see any other reasons why I might be afraid of that emotional reaction?
Yeah, I think like what I experience a lot, like in the courses that I lead, where we have people practice conversations where, for example, they have to come and tell someone that the budget of your project is being cut by 50%, or you cannot increase the headcount in your team because the market's taken a turn for the worst, and I know everyone's burning out, but sorry, you can't hire anyone new. And then you practice being with all of their actions. What? You can't be serious. Like, but people are like burning out, and are you telling me I have to go back? And people practice being with that.
Mm-hmm.
I find that what people are afraid of is like, I think our brains generate all the worst case scenarios. Like, well, I know that person tends to be quite critical, so I know they're going to accuse me of making a stupid decision, or I know that person is quite sensitive, so they might cry, and then what will I do if they cry? So we imagine all of these things, which, yeah, you're right, it's probably shaped by, all of us have our different flavors of reactions that would be difficult to be with. For some, it might be like angry people. For some, it might be very silent people. But I think it stems from this assumption that there's some way I can control that. That there's, if I just rehearse what I'm going to say well, there'll be some magic way, some explanation that will minimize the negative reactions. Whereas I find it's much better just to say, well, they're going to react. Of course they are. It's like if someone was going to give me that news, or someone's going to break up with me, I'm going to be upset. Like, that's a reality.
Yeah.
And the metaphor I like is like, our tendency is to think that I need to put a lid on that. I need to contain it. Otherwise it will get too big and it'll get out of control and I won't know what to do and I'll lose all, but rather it's like to give it oxygen, to let it kind of be there and listen to it without putting a lid on it is weirdly like the thing that helps people move through those emotions and get to something constructive. Like, our brain thinks the opposite. We think that, need to contain it, but actually that makes it worse. Whereas if I just play back, yeah, wow, sounds like you're all super disappointed and really angry at me, and yeah, and maybe you feel like you can't even trust me now. If I just say it as it is, then it takes care of something and people's brains calm down. But it feels totally counterintuitive. And again, if I have the parent-child mindset that I need to be responsible for taking care of them, making them okay again, making sure they don't lose motivation, etc., then that's what's driving me. But I that's impossible. I can't do any of those things anyway. So if I let go of that, I think it's much more liberating. It's
Yeah,
still scary because it's an unknown, but
for sure. The metaphor you used, like giving it oxygen, made me think you could logically make sense of it in the way that an emotion's going to be there anyway.
yeah,
You can either acknowledge it and let it be and be processed,
yeah,
or people are going to walk away with it. It's not
yes,
that they don't have the emotion, they just won't show it in front of you. And then you're actually out of control because you don't
exactly.
know what they're going to do with it.
Yeah, I remember seeing a piece of research years ago where they had people watch like a really distressing film, and then they had three groups of people. One group, they had them do nothing after watching the film. Another group, they had them name their feelings after watching the film. And then the third group, they had them suppress their feelings. And the one that named their feelings, their like arousal level, their sort of like stress level returned to normal the quickest. Whereas the other two groups, so it's the same thing. Like if people will have those emotions anyway, and you might as well give them the space to like vent them so they feel heard, and then they're much more likely to become constructive. It's going to take a lot less energy for everyone if we just allow that some space.
Yeah. And I think that that's another key part of the adult to adult relationship is to be confident in others of owning their side
Yes.
of the street. Like that's the term I that makes sense to me. Like when you described initially, like I'm taking care of my own responsibilities and my part in it is like owning your side of the street, but the other part is trusting in others to own their side of the street. Is like I don't, obviously I don't walk into a meeting trying to agitate people or disappointed, but if the situation is such of that something needs to be addressed and you can assume that these emotions come up, it's not your job to make sure people don't have these emotions, and you can trust that they can take care of themselves in dealing with it. And
Yes.
yeah, now if you did your part well in holding the space for it to be processed and regulated as best as possible, then you've done your job, but not in preventing it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I like that they can take care of their side of the street. In tough, we say relating to people's potential and to their capacity. That, hey, we get by in our daily lives with all kinds of things, grief, health, whatever, and we somehow manage.
Yeah, that's the other thing is we overemphasize the importance of work so much because that's maybe all we know about these people. We only ever see them at work and we just see them as colleagues, but there's another whole human attached on the backside of that, and they probably deal with much more difficult things outside of work. Hopefully not, but many do, and they manage somehow. Again, that doesn't mean to not
Yes.
care about it, but to have the confidence that others are capable of dealing with emotions, I think is a big
Yeah.
part of the dynamic.
Yeah. And I think the two things, like to go back to two things we talked about, this pair of like listening and supporting people to make choices is like a very caring thing without being responsible and taking care of someone. Like I can listen to you so you feel heard, and then I can ask you, what do you need now? You know? And I don't have to fix you or take care of you. And you might say, I just need some space. Great. So let me know if you want to talk about it some more. People are always asking me like, should I suggest that we have a follow-up meeting, or should I suggest that we talk about something else? It's like, well, I don't know. Ask them.
Mm.
Give them, the benefit of being able to choose for themselves what they need.
The only situation that comes to mind where I advise against that is when someone's overwhelmed. What do you need is like just another question on top of
Yes. Yes.
don't know where up and down is,
Yeah.
stop asking me questions.
Yeah. My partner would tell you that I'm guilty of doing that with him for sure. He's like, I don't know. Don't ask me that. Oh, sorry.
It's like, force of habit.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Then it's better to just be like, yeah, okay, seems like you're super overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And just be with that. Nothing more.
All right. Looking at the time, we're 48 minutes in. I started with the mission with defining adult to adult relationships. I still have the back of my head, and I'm not any closer. That's not your problem. But let me see how we might get closer. Here's one. So switching to maybe more practical implementation. What are practical steps to take people from a more parent-child dynamic into an adult-to-adult dynamic?
I'm thinking about like when I'm training people in adult to adult conversations, like we get people to practice a few different conversations, like 5 different conversations that we think are good adult to adult conversations to know or be skilled at. One of them is a coaching conversation, which is not coaching as in like a fancy, you need to do a several year qualification to do it, but it's literally just asking someone questions and letting them find a way forward, and some other simple things. But maybe what I could share is sort of 4 things that run through all of those conversations, like 4 pillars, you could say, that I think if you start to be more conscious of in your kind of day-to-day work life, then you'd be on the way to adult, I think. I don't know. Let's test my theory. So the first one is to be much clearer with purpose. So every conversation, every meeting that we have, to be clearer on what's the purpose. Because we go into it, I know it sounds really obvious and daft, but we go into like most conversations not knowing or not agreeing what the purpose is. So you might come to me with a challenge, and what you want is just to have a space to listen and think. And I think what you want is advice, for example. But we don't check. I don't ask you, what do you want? Or we go into meetings, how many of us have these recurring meetings where we just show up? It's our weekly meeting and we show up and we do the thing. But we've sort of lost sight of what actually is the purpose of this today.
It's one of my pet peeves, recurring meetings.
And the reason why that is relevant to adult is I can't be a responsible adult if I don't know what I'm saying yes to or what I'm turning up to. So if I don't know the purpose of a conversation, if I haven't agreed to it, if I haven't chosen it, I cannot be responsible for it. So if you have purposeless meetings, you'll see people kind of abdicating and not being responsible because the purpose isn't clear.
So can I rephrase this to see if I got it right? So it's about stating the desired outcome of any interaction?
Yeah, it can be. It can be like, so if I give it in 2 directions. So if someone comes to you, especially if you're a manager or someone senior, for example, and they say like, oh, I'm really struggling with this thing, you can say, oh, wow, yeah, sounds tricky. So what do you want to get out of this conversation? Do you want some advice, or do you want me to ask some coaching questions? What's a good purpose for this? Maybe that sounds strange to say it that way, but and then the other way around. So that's if someone's coming to me. If I'm initiating a conversation with someone, then it's also for me to be clear about what's the purpose. Is the purpose that I want to give someone feedback, or is the purpose that I want to be right about something, if I'm honest with myself? Is the purpose that I want to have a better relationship, or is the purpose that I want to be right? It's like good to be, because a lot of times, again, people will, if they come to you with challenges like, I'm struggling with this and I want to talk to this person, they're often not clear what the purpose would be if they would talk to that person, and then it's not going to go very well. So being clear on it for yourself is useful, but also being transparent about that with the other person. So is it okay if we talk about our relationship, how we work together, because I think it could be even better. And I sense there's some things like, would you be up for that? So I've been really clear, transparent about the purpose, and I've given you a choice to say yes or no. So that immediately makes it more adult.
Yeah. Hang on, I've got a follow-up question on this where I need your advice on, and it's an actual challenge. So let's assume I have someone that we've talked about, these dynamics, and maybe where the other person's intention is in somewhat ulterior, as in not straightforward of what they're actually saying, but they maybe want to change my behavior or anything else that is kind of manipulative. And I see that happening again. And what I just heard you say, and is what I'm usually doing, is asking, what's your intention for saying this?
Yeah.
And now we come back to our topic that can very easily then slip into the parent-child dynamic, because it's me like, haha, I just noticed you doing the thing. I caught you. And even if that is not my intention, it's so easy for the other person being triggered in that. And it's like, he knows these dynamics, and now he just pointed out that I made this technical error again, and we immediately slip into the parent-child dynamic. So how would I go about it to maybe A, not make that happen, or B, how to get out of it quickly when it does?
Yeah, I guess, it has a lot to do with like how you're being, right? That's also a key thing of adult to adult, is like it's a being thing and it's a doing thing, which is what makes it kind of tricky. So I guess you can make that intervention in a parent-child way or in an adult way. And I guess to do it in an adult to adult way, and of course there's no guarantee that you won't still get some pushback, but what comes to mind is like maybe to be kind of authentic and human about why you're saying that question. Like, can I ask a question? Because listening to you now, I become a bit confused and I'm not exactly sure what we're talking about, and I don't want to make assumptions. Can I just check what's your intention with bringing this up? Or, like saying something about it that shares something about what's going on in me, rather than I'm doing a facilitator intervention or something.
Yeah, so just great, Lisa. Now you gave me some more work to do for myself, because I'm usually not saying this when I'm at the confused state, but already at the agitated state.
Right. Yeah.
Which then I can still say the same words, but I guess underlying tone or body language already shows that I'm agitated, so it's easier to slip into the parent-child dynamic.
And that's good to know about yourself. Knowing's half the battle.
Is it though?
Isn't that what they say in
G.I.
Joe?
Well, I guess in the grand scheme, where it has taken me 40 years to get to this bit, I guess it is half the battle. But if it takes until I'm 80 to solve the other half, there's still a long time to stay in this situation.
Yeah, maybe it's a lifelong journey.
Anyway, I interrupted with another question on your first pillar, which was being more intentional about your purpose.
Yeah, being clear. It's like to have a clear shared purpose. So if I'm coming with a purpose, be transparent about, this is my purpose in the conversation. Like, the purpose of this meeting is, I think I want to talk about this. Do you agree? Anyone have any different ideas? Or to agree the purpose together, either to have someone say yes or no to something, or say, no, I think our purpose should be this. Okay, well, let's talk about that then. But either way, to be clear on what it is. So that's pillar number one. Pillar number two is then about to be much more clear with whatever it is that we're saying in the conversation. In other words, if it's a feedback conversation, instead of sugarcoating it, which goes back to our thing before about relating to people as being capable of handling things, it's just to be clear about, so having established the purpose, having got your consent, here's my feedback. My feedback is, I think you talk too much sometimes, or whatever it is, I try and be really clear and direct. Or if the message is, I'm informing you about something, like you didn't get the promotion or whatever, it's better that I just say that instead of saying like, so Manuel, I really appreciate you and you've done great work. And as you know, we've been thinking about this for a long time and we've weighed up all the different, it doesn't just get to the point.
The tension is like, I'm waiting for the other shoe to
Exactly.
drop. It's like, just say it.
Exactly. So it's better to just be clear about the thing that I want to say, or the pebble or whatever it is. So that's pillar number 2. Pillar number 3 is to listen. That's what we talked about before, that an adult conversation always involves listening, and not just listening like, yes, the sound is going into my ears, but actively saying things to help the other person feel heard and gotten and taken seriously and all of that, because things will just go better if I do that. It's like to respect that their worldview is valid. I don't have to agree, but to, take it seriously. And then the 4th one is to agree who is responsible for what. So again, adult to adult, if you want it to be adult to adult and you leave most meetings or conversations and you're holding the ball of responsibility, maybe you need to do something to give it back, So I coach a lot of people, or have people in my courses who are doers. And, when people are quiet, what should we do next? Well, how about we do this? And you fill the gap and you step in, and then you walk away carrying the responsibility. And maybe that's fine sometimes if that's what you want. But if what you want is for other people to be more responsible or to have distributed responsibility, then that 4th pillar is useful. It's like to end all conversations with, okay, so who's responsible for what now? And if it's a relationship conversation, we probably place it between us. If it's coaching conversation, it should be with you and not with me as the coach, and so on. So yeah, clear purpose, be clear about what I want to say, listen, and clarify who is responsible for what.
So in that last part, as a common situation, I would say, comes up, I'd like to hear how you would respond to it. So let's say you go into a meeting and there's an important issue that needs to be addressed and actually requires action afterwards. And you know that you can't take care of it yourself entirely for whatever reason. But then you have that meeting and you get to the point, okay, so who's taking care of what? And there's the dust balls rolling over, and then you hear the needle drop. So what do you do then?
Yeah. So then this is where I would suggest another kind of tool that's not really a tool, but is to talk about that. So to say that, like, okay, so no one is stepping in now. So no one's taking responsibility for this. So what are we going to do about that? And then usually someone steps in.
So I'll continue. So most of the time, in my experience, people, it's not that they're shying away from, they're not lazy, but they know, like, I'm already overwhelmed with all these things I already have on my plate. There's no way I'm going to take on another one. On the other hand, as we talked about before we started recording, is like, saying no when you know you can't fulfill that promise is also something we want to encourage people. So what if everyone's already has their plate full and it actually makes sense for them and the company to say, no, I shouldn't take this on?
Yeah. Well, I think it would be really good if that was surfaced by asking that question. Like, okay, so no one's stepping in. So what does that mean? Does that mean that, this is not that important, or we're just overwhelmed with other priorities, or like, what's that about? And to talk about that. And as you say, maybe everyone says, well, no, we think it's important. It's just that, none of us has the capacity to deal with it. And then I would say, one of my mentors, Mickey Kashtan, she talks about the capacity lens and being able to have conversations with people, ourselves, others, where we talk about, do we really have the capacity to do this? like, are we forcing that? Or do we need to confront that we don't have the capacity currently to do this? And if that's the case, and the capacity could be energy, could be competency, if that's the case, then it's better to not to force it. And then you have this gap, right? This sadness of, oh, that's a shame because we wanted to do that thing, or that thing was important. And then you just have to be with that loss. She phrases it as like mourn the loss.
Mm-hmm.
So if you, like me, are a bit of an automatic yes and find yourself taking on so many things, the sort of painful realization is there's no gentle, lovely way of like saying no more. It means that you have to say no to some things that you would really like to say yes to, and then you just have to mourn the gap and move on.
I think my issue in that situation is not so much that I say yes to too many things. I think the uncomfortable part for me is more telling you that your thing is not that important. And please stop bringing one of these every 2 weeks to these meetings because we've got more important shit to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. That already sounds bigger than a pebble discussion.
Yeah, but I mean, to say that, it's like I feel nervous to say this because I don't want to hurt you, but I notice that you keep bringing these things, and the reality is I don't have the capacity to deal with them, and I wish I did, but I don't. So what can we do about that?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and it's easy to say in this conversation, right? And
Yeah,
when you're in
but
it, it's
much harder in practice. Yeah.
My go-to coping mechanism is freezing, so I'm like,
Oh, me too.
Okay. Measuring success. How do you know that a company is operating in an adult-to-adult manner? What are the signs that you see where they can point to and say, this is an indicator that we're doing well?
That's a great question. I think like it's in some ways it's sort of tricky to measure because it's mostly anecdotal, and it's mostly things that you can observe or feel that you wouldn't necessarily know to look out for unless someone has told you to look out for them, if you see what I mean. But I think about the example of my colleague Karen when she was the interim CEO of this company, and she was trying to transform them into a self-managing adult-to-adult kind of company. And she said one of the signs for her that it was working was when they started making decisions without her as the CEO, where they would just inform her, oh, by the way, we bought a new car for the building, just so you know. Or she would come in and they would be having meetings, and they didn't feel the need to sort of involve her, or like, oh, CEO's here, da, da, da. So in other words, it's like looking for signs that leadership is distributed. And sometimes I have this questionnaire that I use in my courses that has these different kind of scales from kind of parent-child to adult, and they're things like, is in a team is sort of leadership carried out by one or a few people only, or do people step in and contribute with leadership as and when it's needed? When you can sort of plot yourself on that scale. Or are the purpose and goals of the team clear to everyone? Or is it only clear to like one or two people, or no one? Do people feel able to bring up kind of tensions or things that are in the way for the team to be effective? Or is the team climate sort of cautious, polite, tentative? There's sort of tension underneath that no one's talking about. And sort of another sign is like that challenges get brought up and raised, kind of big, meaty, difficult questions, and solutions come from all over the place to address it. It sort of becomes like less dramatic. You sort of see people bringing things up. and you think, ooh, this is going to be tricky. And then you see people talking about it and not looking to anyone else to solve it, but sort of talking together about, okay, so what could we do about that then? And they're sort of, coaching each other as a group to figure it out.
A lot of these examples that you gave are tied to leadership, right? And I can see how the default mode would be I defer to a leader to have the answers and get into the child-parent dynamic with the person that's leading me, and that makes a lot of sense. That speaks against it. My assumption is there's those are all indicators for that dynamic between those in that constellation, and I'm assuming there might be others in like peer-to-peer relationships. Do any come to mind how we can identify that you're doing a good job in adult-to-adult interactions on peer level?
Yeah, I would say, one indicator would be that that someone, I would take it as a sign that our relationship was adult to adult, or I was doing my part for an adult to adult relationship, if people felt able to bring things up with me that were sensitive or difficult, sort of circling back to what we were talking about with relationship conversations. And also, I think a sign is like being able to do that, to talk about things kind of free from interpretations, judgments, kind of blame, projections, like, so for example, is the difference between someone saying like, Manuel, I think it's really disrespectful that you're constantly late. Whenever we have a call, you show up 10 minutes late. It's like really disrespectful. I would say that's not adult to adult. The difference would be like, it's kind of talking about those 4 pillars that I was talking about. Like, Manuel, can I bring up this thing about our meetings that is sort of, for me, starting to affect our relationship a bit, and that troubles me because I really want us to work well together. Can we talk a bit about this thing that's bothering me? Would that be okay? And then I bring it up. You're late. I don't place. It's like nonviolent communication, right? I don't place a judgment or an interpretation on that, and I share how it impacts me, and I be willing and open to how it is for you, and see, is there a way that we could make it work, given that you're someone who's really busy and punctuality is not so important, and for me it is a need that I have. So it's like that we would be able to talk about things, both kind of work related things and relationship related things, with sort of our most generous versions of each other in our minds, like my internal representation of you is like a generous, open version, instead of like the villain version of Manuel.
Can I mirror one thing back that I've noticed you doing now several times in these examples that I think also plays a big role? The way you always addressed it is, this is happening and it's starting to affect our relationship, as in how I feel in it. And it always conveys to me that our relationship is important to you. And I think that's a core point in me being open to hearing it and wanting to like change my behavior to be able to fix it, because like, oh, our relationship is important to you and it's important to me. So yeah, clearly, of course, I would want to adjust my behavior if it doesn't matter to me. I would accommodate you so you can feel good in it.
Yeah, exactly. Which is so different to me trying to come at it from like, it's right or good to be on time. And also, like, if we have this conversation, the outcome might not be that you start to come to meetings on time. It might be something entirely else. Who knows? We won't know until we start talking about it. I might discover things about you that I had not considered. And we're so much more, Mickey Cashtan talks about mutual willingness. I was commenting on your LinkedIn post about this, about, that I'm so much more willing to meet you halfway if I understand your needs, and if I feel that you have heard and taken in my needs. Then I can give up my needs many times, because at least I feel I've been heard in them,
Yeah. And the reason might be I'm dropping off my kid at school and I'm actually rushing each day, but
exactly,
just can't make it. And if we just start 20 minutes later, I'll be early.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is mostly not the case with people who are consistently late, but just to give
You
an
never
example.
know. But we invent these fantasies in our heads. Like, this is what creates these dynamics. It's like, oh, he's always late. He's so disrespectful. He's so selfish, so unprofessional. They make all these things up.
Yeah, completely. All right, how do we tie this up? Still trying to come up with a definition that if someone asks me, what is an adult to adult relationships, what does that even mean? Because maybe their response is, we're all legal age, like legal drinking age, and like we're all adults because we're a certain age, and that's entirely not what we're talking about. What I'm coming away with now from this conversation is like it is a very multifaceted topic, and probably not able to condense it down into one metaphor or one sentence or even one paragraph and do it justice. It will always be a simplification. But the one I'm coming away with now is adult to adult relationships are about owning my side of the street, as in I'm seeing what my part is in the dynamic, and I can address difficult things, or I deal with difficult situations in a way trusting that you can also own your side of the street, as in you can regulate your own emotions. I'm not responsible for them. I can be respectful and do all the right things, but I'm not here to caretake you. If I make this the definition and I put Lisa Gill under it, how would you feel about that?
I think I really like it, but it's a little bit incomplete somehow. I think it's because for me, adult to adult is being responsible for my side of the street. And it's not about me being responsible for your side of the street, but it is also about me being conscientious, maybe, like being a good citizen. Like, this is our street and I have my side and you have your side. But it's not nice if I throw litter onto your side, or if I see that your side is on fire and I don't say anything about that. Or I don't know if I'm stretching this metaphor, but it's like,
no,
I think to be responsible for myself and the whole, as in WHOLE, without being overly responsible,
I like that very much, actually, because I think that I try to convey that, but you put it into the metaphor, and I like that. It's like we're still living on the same street.
Yeah.
And I care about the street.
Yes.
Or not just the street, but your side of it and my side of it. And if I see that you're struggling, I offer help. I don't throw things on your side. I don't make your life more difficult just because it's easy for me, or out of malice. I like that addition very much.
Yeah.
So,
and I don't tell you how you should decorate your house, because that's my taste. But yeah.
All right. Let's go with that for now. I'll sleep over it, but I kind of feel like that's a good way of explaining it to people concisely. That still conveys a lot of the complexity. Great. Anything else that you want to add before we wrap this up? Without it, it wouldn't be complete, in air quotes.
Yeah, I was just thinking, without opening up a whole can of worms again, another metaphor that I find useful in thinking about the transition from this parent-child dynamic that it's like the water that we swim in, into a more adult-to-adult dynamic or world of relationships. I think it's a bit like learning a new language, that we're all, I think, native speakers. And it's interesting because it seems to be all over the world that we have this parent-child dynamic in different ways, in different cultures. But I've spoken to pretty much people on every continent, and it seems kind of universal that we're conditioned as human beings into that parent-child dynamic.
I mean, that's where we start, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's where we start, and that's what schools kind of program us to, and then workplaces. And now we're realizing, oh, we need to like shift that a bit, and we're still figuring out how to do that. And so when we start practicing more adult to adult relationships and conversations, it feels clumsy and weird and uncomfortable at first because it's not our native language. You know, when you start to practice listening to someone more intentionally, you'll feel like, this is weird. Surely I sound odd. This is not natural. Or if I start to ask more coaching questions instead of always giving advice, this is odd. But it will feel odd in the beginning because you're not fluent yet. And it'll take some time to find your version of it that feels integrated and feels like you. But the only way to get there is to start practicing and to not be kind of courageous, I guess, and be willing to make mistakes and not worry so much about being fluent, but just be committed to practicing.
That makes a lot of sense. Before we can finish, I just thought of another question. Where does the term adult to adult derive from for you? Where did you get that from?
Yeah, well, a lot of people are familiar with like transactional analysis and things like that, but for me, that's not. I was aware of that, but for me, my introduction to it came from the first course I did with Tough Leadership Training before I was working with them. And then for me, it became this very powerful way of kind of looking at these two paradigms, like how it's been in the world of work and in many other things in society, I think, and what's emerging now. And to me, it was just like a very helpful shorthand for kind of dynamics and a way of being that I hadn't been able to put words to before, you know, and I just find it powerful to come back to again and again. And people seem to, there's nuances of it, but people seem to sort of get what you mean. And I guess, yeah, some of the misconceptions are if it's not top down, then it's sort of laissez-faire and anyone can do whatever they want. Whereas adult to adult to me is clear in that it's like, no, it's not just being fluffy and, you know, nice and anyone can. It's also being kind of direct and tough. And so, yeah, tough was the context where I got introduced to it in the way that we've been talking about it, and I find it very helpful.
The place where I came across the term was actual Eric Berney's transactional analysis. So I read the book Games People Play, and I found it very intriguing, as in I never developed the natural capacity of, you know, reading social situations. And he just describes these patterns of, well, these are the games people play. One person does this and the other does this, and this is what's actually happening, and this might be when they shift, you know, from one dynamic to another. And I was like, oh my God, this is like revealing the curtain. I can now see the code in the matrix.
Yes, I was just thinking that.
Now I understand. And it was so good. I mean, it's a bit dated. It's from the early 60s, and
yeah,
he's got examples in there from the maid doing the dishes and how to address it when it's not right. Like, didn't age well, but the concept itself, I find like he did a great service in you know helping understand what's happening in different situations. And just in preparation of our conversation, I reread parts of it, or like skimmed my notes, and it was a great reminder of, he says, like, conversations go smoothly as long as like the vectors are aligned. If you imagine like on top the parent, the adult, and the child on both sides, and like as long as parent talk to each other, like gossiping about, you know, the market, that's a parent conversation, or adult trying, in his words, that's solving a problem. I would say that's also the biggest critique from today's perspective, is he just left out emotion completely. Like, emotions don't belong in the adult circle, and child is the thing is play. Like, two children just
Yeah.
they want to play with each other. And that can also be, two grown-ups are playing, as in like flirting or something like that. That would be a typical play. And when conversations don't go well is when those vectors cross. Like if I asked a adult question, let's say I ask, where are my keys? And my partner responds with, you always make me responsible for everything. Like, where should I know where your keys are? That's going to the child position and addressing my parent. Like, that's crossing. Or the other way around could also be like, well, maybe you should take care of your own things. You're not a child anymore. That's going up to the parent perspective and pointing down to my child. And that's, he says, that is where all the conflict comes from. And I find it interesting as a pattern, is like understanding where does communication break down and noticing that moment when that happened. So for that, I still find it very useful.
Yeah, that is useful. Yeah, I think in Tough, we've kind of simplified it really just to the kind of parent-child and adult-adult as kind of two states, you could say. And a key distinction of adult to adult is that it's chosen, and parent-child is automatic, which that's what we say anyway, in terms of like how we are in organizations and in stress and stuff. When we're being parental or being like a child, we usually haven't chosen that. It's like a reactive state, whereas adult to adult is something more conscious, more chosen. So it's okay that we will slip back into parent-child or child-parent. Like, of course we will, we're human. But the idea is to hopefully get better at catching ourselves when we do that, or knowing our tendencies, and then being able to bring ourselves back to adult if that's what's more appropriate.
That's very much in line with transactional analysis, where Eric Berney says you're slipping out of adult's ego state when your reaction is emotionally distorted. I think in today's language you say you're triggered. And or when it's a programmed reaction, as in societal expectations, this should be the course of action or the way to respond. Whereas the adult is in the presence, like, I'm reacting to what's here now. It's not about what happened in my past and what is triggered, and it's not about my surroundings and what everyone else expects of me.
Nice.
All right, should we wrap it up here?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, Lisa, thank you so much. This was a wonderful conversation. I enjoyed it thoroughly, and it definitely deepened my understanding of the whole topic, and that is exactly what I was in for. We might have not come up with the exact definition, but I think we shaped out a metaphor that we can both live with, at least for now. It was just really nice to have a chat again. Thank you.
Yeah, likewise. I learned a lot. Thank you. Really enjoyed this.